Hello and welcome to Virtual Coffee Brownbag Edition. We are very excited and happy to have you all here with us today, and especially to have Jessi here presenting on this topic. Our mission here is to be a welcoming tech community that provides room for growth and mentorship at all levels and creates meaningful opportunities for learning, leadership, and contribution for everyone. To find out more about Virtual Coffee and to check out our code of conduct, you can go to virtualcoffee.io. We are really excited to be listening to Jessi's talk, Chess and Usability, today. She's got some awesome blog posts on this too, so definitely check those out. I'll try and grab those links and throw them in the chat in a second here. Jessi Shakarian is a freelance content strategist and information architect apprentice at LADIA Design in Los Angeles. Her articles on chess and UX have been featured on UX Collective, Chessable, and Chess Tech News. So thank you so much, Jessi, for being here and presenting on this for us.
Thank you for having me. This is super exciting. Let me get my screen together, share my screen because I got the PowerPoint. Those are my notes. Do you want this one? Yeah. Okie dokie. Minimize. Oops. This. Okay. Alrighty. So thank you all for attending my brown bag. It's going to be on chess and usability. All right. So a little bit about me. I'm a UX designer and information architect. I am a chess beginner. I have never played before watching Queen's Gambit over winter. And now I am prepping for tournaments, and that's super exciting. I've pretty much forged my own path in this like UX and chess world. I really just started blogging about it, and I thought it would look good on my portfolio. And then all of a sudden it became like, hey, you should come and write for like UX Collective. And then I started meeting other folks in the chess community online, and then it kind of grew and grew. And now I'm doing, started doing some consulting work for chess companies on UX. So that is a little bit about me and how I got here. Let's see. So just want to preface this. You will not be learning how to play chess today. Don't worry. This is more of an overview and a little bit of history more than anything else. All right. So talking about my favorite chess story, Napoleon, great military leader, not a great chess player. You know, he took over Europe in the early 1800s. He made himself the emperor of France and other countries. He brought whole armies to his control and took chess with him everywhere he went, to every country. But actually he was a pretty terrible chess player, mediocre at best. And his own generals beat him like every single time he played. So yeah, you don't have to be a great the military association of chess and controlling an army. Like, you can still be a terrible chess player, but be a good military leader. He has famously said chess is too difficult to be a game and not serious enough to be an art or science. And I think that's pretty interesting for someone who passionately loved chess but was terrible at it. So when Napoleon was captured and ultimately surrendered to England, he was exiled on an island called St. Helena, which is out in the South Atlantic Ocean. He still had supporters when he was exiled, and they decided to send him a chess set, and which is the one on the screen. And it was made out of ivory, and it's obviously very nice. And but they actually put an escape plan inside one of the pieces. And there was one person taking that board on the ship out there, and he had a heart attack and died. and nobody else knew that there was a secret escape plan inside of the chessboard. So Napoleon played on that set for the rest of his life, never knowing that there was an escape ready for him. So I thought that was a really interesting example of usability. Nobody, because he knew how to play so well, didn't know how to play that well, but was so well known for being a player that nobody thought twice about a chessboard being sent to him. So I thought that was interesting. Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty. What is chess? So something that I do when I get really interested in something is start learning the history. It doesn't really matter what it is. I like to know like how we got here. What did it look like? How did it evolve? So chess was started in India as a war game in the 7th century. It was called chaturanga, which means 4 limbs. And if you enjoy yoga, that term comes up too. The game as we know it today was formalized in the 15th century or so. And the unique thing about chess is that it's not owned by any one country. Chess is very much, I think, a part of our humanity because it's been with us for so long, so roughly 1500 years. So if we look at, I'm here, okay. If we look at the board itself, we have a row of pawns, and then we have the king and queen here at the top. Then we have a bishop, the knight, which is the horse, and then half here, you can see it's a rook right here too, which is the one that looks like a tower. And then it's the same on this half, and it's the same over for black. It's just black instead of white. So essentially, when you play chess, you are controlling an army, a figurative one, and that still remains the same as part of the game in India. And the sort of challenge of the game is working within the limitations of each piece's ability to move, right? Like a bishop can only go diagonal, a rook can only go up, like straight up or to the side. And a key component of playing the game is really about being able to visualize what you do and then what your opponent does. And so it's a very valuable skill to be able to think 2, 3, 4 moves ahead from a current position, either yourself or your opponent. And what you're essentially doing is reading the board. If I do X, then here's what my opponent could potentially do, and here's how I respond to that. I think that at its core, chess is very much like interaction design. It's you as you're a user. Let's say I'm playing as white. I have an advantage because I always start first. So therefore I have the sort of mindset of here's what I can do because I have 1 extra move, and here's how black will respond to that. And I think that's very similar to like UX work, because as designers, we have to think about, well, at least for me anyway, I have to think about how a user is going to use a website or an app. And as chess players, we have to think about how our move affects the other person playing. I think that level of skill of thinking about what your opponent does is very similar to when you code, right? Like, so when you pick a stack, then you're now working within the built-in limitations, but also the strengths of the language that you're working in, right? Like JavaScript is one, but also like, I don't know, like F# is another. Like they have functions that they do, but there are things they don't do as well. So, there's a lot of variability there. Okay, so I just wanted to show you, this is the predecessor to chess, chaturanga. And as you can see, it looks very similar to chess. We have the checkered board. We have a row of infantry. There's the top king and, well, they don't have a queen. They have a vizier, which is like a counselor. And then they have 3. There's the 3 on the same side. Still 64 squares. just like a regular chessboard. So instead of a bishop, they have an elephant, and they have a knight, just like we do. Well, it's a horse, but they have a horse, just like we do. And then they're, oh, sorry, I was just reading my notes. Okay. And then they have a chariot instead of a rook. So we can see that a predecessor of the game is really not that different from the game that we know today of chess. Okay, so language, super interesting. So when the game started in India, when around the time that the Islamic Empire started growing, they eventually came to, like, chess eventually became a part of like Arabic culture, and Muslim countries that took up the game, they were played by generals. So it continued this sort of war game type environment. And a lot of the Arabic like words and things like that actually still exist today. So, you know, we talk about, we have a king, their counselors, the not vizier, but the firs. You know, so the king, for example, the word checkmate comes from the Arabic word for the king is dead, which, you know, in the end of the game, you have to capture your king and trap the opponent's king, trap them so they can't get out. And then we have, you know, rook remains the same as it does in Arabic. And then they have the elephant, but that eventually becomes the bishop. And then they have the same word for like an infantryman, which is what a pawn is. So the game was basically taken over from from India to the Islamic countries. And as the Islamic Empire grew, they brought it to Europe, and particularly through Spain. And that was around the 10th century. And religion was a big issue at the time. And so in Islamic culture and also in Judaism, you cannot have images with like a face on it. So that tend to be what we think of as like our chess pieces. Like, I'm sure that you imagine one particular chess set when you think of that, and we'll go over that. As it moved through Europe, it became, rather than being a war game, it kind of became very fashionable to play. And high society, royal courts, pretty much anybody who was sort of wealthy, it became like a way to be, you know, intelligent and look at I can play this game, right? So, you know, that as it spread, and then eventually it began to spread through the masses. But I thought what was interesting was that we can see that there's an evolution in these pieces, that they still pretty much look the same. We still have some similar words, you know, checkmate, that was created that long ago. And the fact that, you know, we can look at this board and say, this doesn't really look all that different from the game that we play today. So that I found very interesting as I was doing my own research, you know, for fun on this stuff. So art is always a great way to see how things have changed or not, depending on how much you know about the game. As a chess player, if you play chess, you can theoretically be able to read at least these two boards, because you know, their chess has not changed that much over the hundreds of years. So this is, so we have the one from 1283, which I believe is like a Spanish Moors in this piece. And so I thought this was an interesting snapshot over 1 century, basically, of how it has changed and yet not, right? And if you can read chess, then these two in particular might be very similar to reading legacy code, because it is an indication of one period of time, and here's how this was used, right? Like I always think of like in JavaScript, like, you know, you don't really use like var anymore, but you use let. So that would be like an example of that. So the fact that in 1283, if they existed today, let's say these paintings all existed today, Then 1283, these people would be able to know some parts of the game that we play now. These two paintings, they would be able to play because the game has not changed since their time. And this particular piece from 1911 is a very famous, most influential artist of the 20th century, and he almost left the art world to be a chess player. And he's sort of on par with Pablo Picasso. But art aside, can we say the same about chess that we say about being online? Like when you think about the time of like AOL discs and how everything was in HTML, like websites have changed a fair amount. Like there was no mobile formatting or things like that, but it kind of hasn't. So chess is really the ultimate example of user experience. So it can be played across time. It has outlived empires and has remained mostly the same game. And because the internet is still so young and tech really is constantly evolving and changing, that I feel like we could probably learn a lot from the game. And the fact that when I realized this, it really like blew my mind. I was just like, chess has not changed. Like there has not been new introductions to rules in over 100 years. And the fact that like chess has evolved with human history, since it's pretty much a touchstone of our like humanity. You can use it in many circumstances as a metaphor, or like everybody kind of knows that there's a queen and that the knight, and that this is that certain things do particular parts of the board, even if you never if you never played. So chess has kind of been there, done that in every part of the world, in part of like going through human, like we love to constantly improve and adapt things, and chess has been there, done that, and come out mostly unchanged, like permanently. So it became like a really interesting way to view being online. And that just really became like almost an obsession a little bit, because I was just like, holy cow, like the internet is not the first thing that this has been done, even though like on a tech level, we're just like, oh, look at all this new stuff. This is so cool. But we can see another way, like another possibility if we look at history, right? And figure out what worked and what didn't, and then apply it. So, okay, we all know what the foundation of every HTML and CSS. So you got a header, got a footer, got the sidebar, some content, right? This is what we all expect when we're online, right? We expect, the logo with our nav bar and, the footer. And then as everything is so mobile forward now, like it has to be on mobile first, that this format remains true. This is like a fundamental building block of how we write code, right? And this is sort of like this almost kind of becomes like, if you think about it as a chessboard, certain pieces move in particular ways. So in a similar sense of like, it's best practice to have a hamburger nav on your mobile formatted website. That is just something that it's expected, right? And so the fact that chess remains mostly the same over a whole, for multiple centuries, like there are just things that you expect, and that expectation is really a mental model. This is what we expect when we're online. That that there is a footer, that we go to the footer to find the contact information for a company or something like that. So this mental model of a website hasn't really changed that much over the 20 plus years of being online. That to me is crazy. Like technology has changed so much, and yet this remains the same. So if, okay, where am I? Okay, so in our example of chess, if a chess player in the 1800s can play the same game that exists today, then this is sort of our similar comparison, right? We have we can still find like, you know, websites that are still built from 1999 and are still running, and it's mostly still the same structure. It's, you know, this I found really interesting, and I began to wonder, like, how can we look to chess to inform this online aspect, right? What can chess teach us? So when we talk about usability, the thing that's key is the ability to ask the right questions to unlock the answers that best help users or the player to get to their end goal, right? So designers and developers work together to build the best site they can, and usability goes well beyond UX, I think. It's written into the code, like, you know, the accessibility, the little icon that comes up, you know, so you can open up the accessibility, like that's all written into the code that has to do with UX, but really the core of it is in the structure of a website, for example. And as a designer, you know, I work with users to figure out the best way to make sure that a website makes sense. I do that by asking questions. You know, try to find this page. How long does it take? Can you easily find and use some particular section? If not, then why? What happened? Like, these are all questions I have to ask. And as a chess player, I have to ask, is this a safe square to put my piece? What will my opponent do when I put my piece there, and how do I respond to it? Is this the most effective way to reach my goal? And for you guys as developers, you build the websites and you have the power to ask yourself similar questions. If I write this bit of code, will everybody be able to use this component? What is the best way to build the code that users will be able to use this particular component effectively, or without, you know, too many issues? Does it make sense, right? When we talk about the sort of stack that you pick, the limitations that are built in, those are questions that I'm sure you must ask yourself. Why do I choose this particular stack compared to another one that might be similar? And so the chess and usability like come down to limitations, like within the product schedule, like the production schedule, the, you know, what the designers are asking for, what your, you know, stakeholders are asking for, and then also just how do I make this effective for users? And so that's once I saw that sort of commonality, it became like, I don't know, just it really opened my eyes to seeing how to think more strategically about being able to make the best internet that we can, you know? Okay, so if this is what you think of when you think about chess pieces, you would be correct. This particular set is called the Stunton Set. It's named for a very famous chess player named Howard Stunton. It's considered the standard design for chess sets and tournaments, and this has been like the go-to design for over 100 years. Even my cheap travel magnetic set is a variation of this set. So it's created in like 1850, but I would say it has very few indications that it looks that old in terms of design. Maybe the horse, the knight has a distinctly Victorian feel to it, but the other pieces not so much, right? So in terms of an equivalent, this would be like LeBron James making his shoes, but the NBA decided to make it required that all players wear it. It's a big deal. However, this was not always the case. And this chess set that you think of, if you think of these look like something like this is a mental model of chess pieces, right? A chess set. But it wasn't always that was not always the case. It was actually much more chaotic. Chess was a social status, so it was more about showcasing your wealth than as much as it is to actually play. Um, so let's look at some chess sets. Chess sets, hooray. Okay, so chess sets used to vary from country to country, and they look very, very differently from each other. There really isn't all that much in common, except for like how distinct the knight looks. But otherwise, you know, the queen and the king are always a bit taller. But otherwise, I don't know. Like, I wouldn't be able to tell them apart if this, you know, this would be an issue if you were traveling from, you know, Germany to England to play a game. This is not what you prepared for, right? If you're this and then you go and you show up and you're like, what is that? You know, that is a functionality issue. These pieces were also so ornate and fragile, and they would fall over as people played them, which doesn't make for good use. Also, France had a special case because their bishop, which would be this piece here, I think it's this one here. They didn't call it a bishop, they called it the fool. And I am still not sure which one in front of these pieces is the fool. So yeah, not great for usability purposes. And part of that is the reason why they have these like beautiful ornate chess sets were because it was a social status. It was played by the upper class society in Europe. And then as it sort of trickled down, it became more fashionable to get new sets and get these really pretty ones. It was also something of an equalizer among the genders, because it was something that men and women could play together. It was built into society as a way to court. Like if you were interested in dating, that's how you could play, and it was considered appropriate, you know. So women actually play a lot of chess back then. So effectively, chess was sort of like a symbol of like of wealth, intelligence, and to some degree, if you were a good player, you know, you would get if you courted someone who was a good player, then you could get a chess set as like a wedding gift. It was a very nice thing. And so these chess sets actually make me think a lot about technology, right? We have like Apple, we have Samsung, and those are big in the US. And then we have like Huawei, I think that's how you say it. And all of those phones all do different things, right? Like you have like the iOS developers, and then you have like the Android developers, and those look very different, right? Because there's only certain things that can be done on certain devices. They're also effectively, you know, status symbols too. Like look at Clubhouse. Clubhouse is only available as a iPhone thing. It's not available to Android. It shuts out a whole group of people, and people started using it as like a status thing. Oh, hey, I got on Clubhouse. Look how cool I am. That was effectively like the same thing for chess sets. So if you had these ornate chess sets, then, you know, that would be like, that you would showcase that and be like, look, I have this really fancy chess set. So, you know, and then the other thing about phones is like the actual phone itself, when you hold it and you have it, or the other components, like, you know, if you have like a Fitbit or an Apple Watch, like, right, that's also a like status symbol. So yeah, that's, oh wait, there was one more thing I want to talk about. I forgot. Where did it go? Right, okay, coding. So if we have different components, right? If you have an iOS developer and like Android developer, you have different levels of how you code, and they do different things for different devices. Something about this chess set, like, even if you just look at it and you'd be like, how do I pick this piece up without it stabbing me? This is going to stab me. That's not good, right? So if you're on a device that, and it's been coded to be effective and that works, but the design doesn't make any sense, then that is a problem. It's not very usable. So like that kind of thing. So we get back to this design. This is why a standardized set is so important. It's less about the social status because it's not super ornate. It's very decorated nicely. and that's good. But it's more about form and function. And I feel like being on the design side, it gets very divided a little bit. And, you know, I will design stuff and then you guys will code it. But it needs to be together. It needs to be a little bit more fluid. You guys as developers, you know, you are also users. And that is a very interesting place, I think, for you guys as a group, because you can eventually, or depending on how, like what your level is, like how long you've been coding, right? Like at some point you'll be able to look at it and go, oh, I know that this hover effect is JavaScript, and I know that this color, you know, palette or whatever is in CSS. And that's very similar to playing chess, because you can look at where a piece is on the board and then you can kind of read the board. So the fact that this chess set is now a mental model of what you think of when you play chess, or when anyone plays chess, like that's kind of a big deal. I don't necessarily know what our mental model is, like in terms of our ability to make websites more effectively, right? Aside from the sort of best practices of coding out, you know, a mobile formatted website, you know, for example. But something I do like about this set is that it's not flashy, and you can see that the curves are where you pick up the pieces, and this doesn't look too stabby, you know. That's really important because it still looks nice, but is functional and can be used. So just the fact that, you know, it always seems like there's a new framework coming out if you're on the front end, and it's always like a new technology, and sometimes it's just not about that, right? Like we don't have to use every new framework that's out there to try, you know, it's good to try things out, but it doesn't have to be used for every single like project, right? Because then you kind of end up with, if you're going to have like a mishmash of, you know, you've got like next, and then you've got like view, and you got all these components, and it's like, that's going to get very hairy, right? And then all of a sudden you've got little stuff poking out at you, and it's going to be difficult for people to use. So it's also thinking about how well this can be used, right? Like anybody can pick these up. They're also weighted. So the fact that when we build a website, maybe a bunch of people in the city can use it because they have good internet, but in a rural community, if they can't use this website that has a lot of frameworks or maybe too much happening, it's not going to load for them. And that can be a problem, especially for how many people don't like have not great access to internet. So I think that this is like the value of chess in the tech space, because when we build sites, we have to ask ourselves if this code or this design has users in mind, and what part, like what do they do with that part of the site that you're working on, right? If you are the user, is this how you would use it? You know, in this case, like, is there a mental model of what we think about when we think about online? And is it clean and easy to use like this set, or does it look really nice and somewhat difficult? You know, like these are the kinds of questions that we ask, that we should be asking, I think. And it's, yeah, I think that's the value of what chess can bring as a strategic thinker and asking the right questions. So I think that is the value of chess. So there you go. Thank you for taking the time to come hang out with me. So that's it. You're muted. Becca, you're muted.
It'd be really great if I unmuted before I said all of those things. Just imagine, they were great and wonderful. And I just said how much I enjoyed this presentation. So that's actually what I did said. I very much enjoyed it. And I really liked the fun facts in there and learning about chess, because I personally am not good at chess and have vowed to never play it again. So I would rather understand the history. Actually, that made me a little bit more interested to play. If anybody has questions, feel free to turn on your camera or unmute, whatever's most comfortable. I am gonna search back through some of these questions here.
Oh my God, that chat. Whoa.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, so Daniel was asking about where the mental model was getting called.
That was a joke.
That was a
Oh,
joke.
okay.
Oh.
I think
Out of context, I was like,
whenever
what?
I think of arrow functions in JavaScript, you call that it's actually you're passing a function into another function, and so it was a joke of where's the being called. Sorry, it's a very geeky kind of joke.
All right, thanks for explaining it to me. Andrew, your hand is raised.
Oh yeah. That was fantastic. Thank you, Jessi.
Thank you.
So, I thought some of those older style of pieces looked cool, but I also, like that the new ones aren't so stabby. So what that makes me think of is, when you relate that to like a user experience for like the chess pieces, it's sort of an ergonomics thing, right? Like what's comfortable to hold, what's comfortable to move, and what's not going to injure me.
Right.
From your perspective, what do you think, like if any one of the pieces could get redesigned to be either more aesthetically pleasing or more functional, what would you change?
That's a really interesting question. I don't know if I would change anything because I mean, I don't know. This is where I start thinking about those like chess sets, right? Like the Simpsons chess set or Harry Potter, right? You're like, these are really cool and like awesome looking, but like if you have a dragon set and they all look like dragons, then how are you gonna know which piece it is since it's on the board? I think that the Stunton set is very effective because it's already a part of our like that's what we think of, right? I don't know if I think it's if it's not broke, don't fix it.
Love that. Sorry, Bogdan and then Colin.
It was the other way around. I think Colin was first.
I'm sorry, Colin and then Bogdan and then Daniel.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. And this reminds me that besides being a chess player, you have your user interface experience, and reminds me that so I'm working on some chess software, as I've told you. I've talked to Jessica and played chess with her a few times. And one thing I'd like to do is, that's one of the things that I'm thinking about bringing to the Virtual Coffee group, is to take a look at my chess software and get some input on how to break it into components, but then also think about the usability of it. It's one of the things I've done for React training. So maybe at some point, either one-on-one or at a brown bag or something like that, that would be a good topic. So
yeah, that would be great.
Yeah. And I guess, was there a question in there? Yeah, I guess, would you like to do that is the question?
Yes, I would.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Awesome. Now you're up, Bogdan.
Thank you, Jessi, a lot. Great, great brown bag, great talk. So I was just wondering, super randomly, like talking about tech and React and things like that. What do you think is like the equivalent of a checkmate in web development?
Oh, interesting question. The checkmate is anytime you get an error. Because it's
a little
impossible.
bit dramatic.
Yeah. Because at least from my like limited coding experience, it's like the thing you go, oh no, I have an error and I can't, like, we can't immediately fix it. You have to figure out how to fix it, but there sometimes isn't, like, there is an answer, at least in the web dev side, but I think it's the error because it's so like in your face. And once you get a checkmate, you're like, that's it, you know?
Or maybe when you get fired and you don't get a chance to fix the error.
Yeah, there you go.
That's true.
Great, thank you. That was a fascinating question. I think we need to throw that in Slack too and see what kind of fun
Yeah,
stuff we
that's a
come
good
up with.
question. Yeah.
Daniel, you're up.
What do you think about these new foldable phones, and how's that going to affect design?
That's a really interesting question. Those foldable phones are a real trip to me, especially because like when I was a teenager when like the Sidekick came out, and Sidekick was like the coolest thing ever. And so the fact that they're trying to redo that, you know, I don't know. I think it's interesting because I've seen the like commercials for it because I haven't actually tried it myself. And so the fold, like the fact that you can have one thing on one part and then another thing on the bottom is going to be a really interesting way to build designs for, right? Because you'll be able to, at least in theory, you know, we could all sit on video and then also have like the Slack open or whatever. So it may just have to be like rearranging the way that we think about how we build websites, especially, I mean, how, the question I have, if anybody knows, is how popular are those? Are those flip phones, like folding phones, like really
Well,
popular?
Samsung makes one. So like
Yeah.
the thing I guess where I'm coming from, or the deep question is not Android and not Apple development, but with Android you have older phones with not as much RAM, so you can't process as much. And
Yeah.
then you have these foldable phones. So not only do you have to think about the foldable phones, how do you kind of balance those two?
That's interesting. Okay, I see what you mean. I think this is interesting because they're also marketing it to like a younger audience. And if you didn't grow up with the Sidekick, and how do you how do you build the mental models for people who are now experiencing it for the first time? That is going to be a challenge to design something that's going to be intuitive for people who would never consider how to, you know what I mean? Like they wouldn't think about a flip phone. Well, okay, I keep calling it a flip phone, but I feel like showing my age now. The foldable phone, that's going to be a new mental model to build. That's kind of what I tend to think of, and how effective building in terms of like Android developers are going to have to build to that. But to how popular it is, like that's also going to be an issue. Will it take off? It's hard to say, you know, like those kinds of aspects. So I'm not sure how.
So you would build two separate websites for two different phone layouts, or?
See, this is where it gets tricky, right? Because you're building for Android, but you have two different screens.
Right.
So is it the same thing as like the way that, so I have a screen here and I have a screen here. So is it the same concept where you just drag it? I don't know, because I can't, I've never used one before. So it might not be that complicated. It's just a matter of how do I get the user to realize that this is a new thing to explore, right? Because they revamped it. So I think it's more about the mental models than the actual like coding. I think seems like it will be easy, but I don't know, you know.
Or it could just be the 3D television 3D of cell phones, so which never took off.
Right. Yeah.
That's really interesting. Michael.
Oh, so I guess starting to play off of the foldables, they're still very, very new and very, very expensive, like $1,500, $1,700. From what I've seen, the actual principle of them is giving you dual displays on a mobile. So in
Mhm,
terms of
mhm.
actual web development, don't think you'll be able to, or you're at least not really intended to have the browser across both screens, or it would just go out and it would go out and expand to both screens. Like if you took Chrome and expanded it out to both of your screens, you're just making the same page wider.
Yeah.
So just like if you're trying to design for a 50-inch monitor. So that's going to be that interesting dynamic. If you're designing an app for this phone, like you're going out and doing a version of Outlook, then that's where you get the idea of you got your email pane that's maybe on one screen and then the actual reading view on the other screen. So you're kind of taking advantage of that form factor, and you've basically are just doing feature detection. Say, oh, I have two screens. This is how I want to split up. I initially raised my hand to talk about when you're very at the beginning of your presentation, you were talking about that original model that we have for a web page.
Mhm.
It reminded we called that the Holy Grail. That was a model that you tried to achieve, but in like the ye olden days was basically impossible. Like, and then we've been developing new techniques, CSS, like Flexbox and Grid,
Mhm.
and all of these other things to make that layout, if not, one, to make the layout possible, and then two, to then make it easy so it's not like such a big deal. And so that kind of comes back to like with the chessboard, they kind of latched on to that ideal board very early on. Like you said,
Mhm.
the 64 squares, the layout of the pieces, that never changed.
Mhm.
And I think maybe you mentioned that, but did the movement rules change?
Yes. So
Okay.
there were things that did change. So when I talked about that in like before, so in India, and then when they started Islam, like the Islamic countries started bringing chess over, they had a king and a vizier, or like a counselor. And then as social changes happened, which I'm actually reading a book right now about how the queen came into play. The queen was a sort of almost like a reflection of the fact that there were many queens in power over the Middle Ages, and that it was a reflection of the social change of like, we need to have a powerful woman on the board, who then became the most powerful piece because she is the highest ranking piece, but she can also go anywhere on the board. And that was not what the original counselor piece did. There's also another piece that changed a little bit too, but the fact that a queen was added to the board and the fact that women could play this game, it's that same thing, right? Like there's an ideal of, the website, like the setup, and that things evolved to make it what it is now, which is everybody takes it for granted. And now, so it's a very similar concept. So that's a great point, and I just didn't have time to include that in my talk. So it is a separate talk, like about gender. Let's see. I got some questions. Is there any other hands?
Colin was asking about the most recent rule change. I don't know if you know that or not.
The most recent rule change was 150 years ago. I know that. I can quickly.
I guess that's interesting to say. How far back can we go and still find someone who knows how to play what we play? Like, can we play?
You could,
yeah.
You could go back to the at least the 1600s, 1700s.
But if the rules have changed since then I would say that doesn't count.
Oh, I see. Yeah. So in terms of like the basics of like a queen being able to castle and just the very basic game, yeah, it can be as far back as the 1600s. The actual like sport aspect and things like that, like you know, like they played by a draw oftentimes, so like they could play a very basic game and then more into like the 1800s.
I mean, like, for example,
what do you mean?
they add a new rule such as en passant, then
Yeah.
nothing before that counts. So when was, yeah.
That's a yeah, that one I don't know, but in terms of like how often does en passant happen? You know what I mean? Like you could still play the game without playing en passant, for example. You know,
Right.
so that's a good question. I'm gonna have to Google that one.
All right, well, we're just about at time here. Are there any last questions? I'm sure you can also ask questions in the Brown Bag channel, Jessi,
Mhm.
or anybody that knows more about chess than I do. Feel free to answer those. All right, that looks like it's it. So thanks so much for being here today and for teaching us all about this. I know I did drop the link to your Medium in the
Oh,
chat,
thank you.
but maybe up that in the Brown Bag channel as well, just so people can read what you've been writing on it. And that's it for today. I think our next event, we have a Brown Bag coming up on Monday, I believe. So you can check that out on Meeting Place or on virtualcoffee.io/events. And we'll see you all later. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, everybody.